Hello and welcome to Days of Learning podcast. I'm your host, David Nelson, and I'm thrilled to be here with you for another segment of our show. Days of Learning is a podcast, and it's a tool for those in the medical and community fields to better understand the resources that are available in those areas and how we can better connect and strengthen those connections to support health for all community members. Days of Learning podcast is sponsored by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention 1815 grant, the State of Wisconsin Department of Health and Human Services, MCOP, Milwaukee County Organizations Promoting Prevention, and MCW, Knowledge Changing Lives. Wow, I am just thrilled today to have this guest, somebody that I've known for a very long time. In fact, I met him on the day I stepped into this community 14 years ago. But our guest today is Brett Fuller. And Brett Fuller is the curriculum specialist for health and physical education within Milwaukee Public Schools, Wisconsin's largest district, which supports 150 physical education specialists. His career spans 3 decades, and in that time, his philosophy has centered upon the ideal of teaching students to be healthy for a lifetime. He believes in improvement of physical education programs, not only at the district level, but within the state of Wisconsin and the nation. He has presented and been published locally, at the state level, and nationally on topics ranging from bullying in physical education, sex education, equity, inclusion, and diversity. Brett served on the Wisconsin Governor's Council on Physical Fitness and Health, and on the Healthy Wisconsin 2020 Task Force on Physical Activity. He is the past president of Wisconsin Health and Physical Education and the current president of the Society of Health and Physical Educators, Shape America, the National Professional Association for Health and Physical Educators. What a joy it is to have Brett Fuller. Welcome, Brett.
It's a pleasure to be here, David.
You know, I have said that we have known each other for a very long time, 14 years now. And can you tell people, a bit about who you are, how we met, and then I want you to talk about your story, what it took to you to have the position that you have today.
Well, like I said, it's a 30-year career. I'm from Palmyra, little town, southwest of Milwaukee, about an hour. 1,500 people in the town I grew up in, 350 people in my high school, 70 in my graduating class. And when I graduated from University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, my plan was to become a physical education teacher, teach for about 10 years, and then get into a teacher education program. But things don't always go the way you're planning in your career. And during 1990, I couldn't find a job. There were hundreds of applicants for every open physical education position in the state of Wisconsin. So my first teaching job was out in the middle of the Mojave Desert out in California. It was a great learning experience for myself to teach for a year at 2 elementary schools out there in the Mojave Desert. But that's why I came back. Desert life was not for me. And I came back to Wisconsin and still couldn't find a job. And I was subbing for about a year and a half. And then finally in January of '93, I decided I couldn't make a living subbing out in the small towns that I grew up in, and came to Milwaukee. And I never left. I love this city. This has been a great place to have a career. I worked as a physical education teacher, subbed for about a year and a half in Milwaukee, and then landed a position at Marshall High School. And after Marshall High School, I stayed there till about 2006. There was an upheaval in our district over high schools, and so I ended up being moved to a different high school for 1 year, and then I ended up taking this role as the curriculum specialist for health and physical education in June of 2007. And on the first day on the job, I was asked to start writing for a grant called Safe Schools, Healthy Students that our district had written for 3 times. It was a multi-million-dollar grant opportunity, and we had failed 3 times. And then I get this phone call from the grants office. Oh, by the way, we need you to meet someone. And that's how, David, you and I met, was both of us on our first day, literally our first day on the job, in our new roles. and MPS was funded for that grant. You know, it was a great experience. It helped me learn a ton about my job and about the reality of administration in a large urban school district.
You know, I remember it well. I remember you had a suit, and it was, you know what? You didn't look all that comfortable in that suit, brother. But it was,
Well,
I remember the day. It was a summer day. It was June.
yep.
It was hot, and we were in that little cafeteria down in the basement of the building. I want to go back because I think this is important. You spoke of growing up in a small town and teaching in, of all places, the Mojave Desert, perhaps at a small community. I'm not sure. How has your growing up in a small town influenced your style of teaching?
Oh, I hadn't thought about that. You know, I think for me, when I first came to Milwaukee, it was obviously a big culture shock. I think one of the things that shocked me the most is literally growing up in Palmyra. We didn't have a key to our front door. Our front door was never locked in the time from when I can remember to the time we sold our house, about 95. And, we knew everybody in town and got, knew people well. And maybe thinking about that on the spot here is I understood the power of relationships, and maybe that would be probably the biggest thing that was influenced on it. I said, I need to get to know my kids, and that was it took a while to learn, but getting to understand, and I'm still learning, and I'll never be done learning because it's not a culture I grew up in, big city culture versus the small town culture. So I'm always constantly having to learn, and didn't understand it. Okay, I'll change my behavior now because I learned this new thing or found a different way to reach someone. So
I'm glad you said that. You said that, Brett, because it says something about you. What I'm going to say about Brett, some of our listeners won't know, but he does get to know his partners that he works with on his projects and who he enters into his building. He gets to know his physical education teachers, the building administrators, and it takes that attitude of, perhaps it takes from growing up in a small town, and I've lived in a small town where we never locked the door. And so I don't think you've lost that. And that says a lot about who you are as an individual.
Well, thank you. I think also back on one of the things is my approach with physical education. And I was a high school athlete. I was not a great high school athlete, but I didn't get into physical education because of being an athlete. I had a very influential physical education teacher at my high school who I saw how much he loved his job. My father, during my real formative years, during my high school years, became ill from heart disease. And I remember vividly him coming home from work every day, and all he did was complain about his job. He never liked his job. He complained about his job. And I told myself, I don't ever want to have that. And again, so, big influencers would be, obviously my parents, my father, not quite in the way he thought he was influencing me in this case. And so I decided I want to do something I think I would enjoy. And I saw how much Mr. Camille loved what he did and cared about the students and wanting us to be successful and healthy throughout life. And so that was one of the reasons I became a physical education teacher. So I'm a little bit different because people say, oh, what's your favorite sports team? And I'll say the Packers. And they say, what else? I'm like, it's about the Packers, I'm not, it's not about the sports for me. It's about teaching youth to be physically active for a lifetime, so they have the skills, knowledge, and desire to be physically active for a lifetime and healthy, and that's been what I do. And that's how I started all my classes, explaining my why. And that was something I learned over the years. Kids, well, why do I need physical education? So it became part of my first day teaching. Here's why I'm here. And we talked about that. My father died at 57 of heart disease. His father at 57 from heart disease. And my father, the only time I ever saw him exercise was when he went deer hunting every fall. In November, we'd go deer hunting and walk out into the woods, sit in a tree stand for a day, and then walk back out. That was about the extent of the exercise my father ever got. And that's not the life I want to live for myself or for my kids or for the kids that I have a chance to influence.
I know for you that your father's passing too early was an influence in your life. You know, and it speaks to your philosophy, your why, if you will. What is physical education, Brett, and why is it important for youth to set that stage to be active for a lifetime?
Well, one of the things I want to say is for those people who are watching and listening, I'm really hoping that the physical education is happening in your community, at the schools that you have either your own children going to or you have friends and families going to, is different than what you remember growing up. It should not be just about the sports and the athletes only getting the attention. It shouldn't be about activities that are elimination or are causing feelings of anxiety and fear because they don't want to get hit during a dodgeball game. Physical education is literally what I was saying before, is we are trying to develop our youth so that they have the skills, the knowledge, and the attitude to be physically active for a lifetime, because it's going to make their lives much more fulfilling, and in some cases easier than hopefully your parents' lives were, because they can do the things longer in life and be happy and active. The research shows that those people who are physically active have better mood, are able to stay on task longer. It just less aches and pains, excuse me, as we get older. We all get older, but I can do things right now at 53 that some of my peers who are my same age are not able to do because I exercise every day. And again, my exercise every day is something I enjoy doing. So that's their part, is we have to have fun. People who are physically active usually choose things that they enjoy and makes them feel better.
You said something that I want to ask about, and you capped it off with this idea of fun. But you talked about this idea of anxiety and fear around physical education. Can you speak into that, please?
So right now, and for the last 15, 20 years, maybe even my entire career, no, maybe not my entire career, but for the last 15, 20 years, there's a huge debate raging within my profession. And I'm going to specifically go to one particular practice that was common for most of us growing up, which was playing dodgeball in a physical education class. And let me start by saying I had a blast in dodgeball. I was fairly athletic. I was able to catch the ball, throw the ball, not as good as the really good athletes, but I could hold my own. But the reality is there's always been a group of kids who were not as talented athletically, and they hate the game. And when you end up creating a game, a physical education teacher chooses to do a game that can cause anxiety and fear in students, you've no longer created a safe environment for your students. And there's this attitude around, well, we got to toughen kids up. Well, if you end up turning kids off to physical education and physical activity, because the activities that we are doing in physical education, and I'm still saying we, because there will still be times when I'll walk into a class, I recommended an activity, I'm like, yeah, this should be a good one, but for that particular class, it may not work. Teachers, that's part of the art of teaching, is knowing your class, knowing what will work for them, what won't. But we should not be creating an environment in our classes that causes fear and anxiety. And that has happened too often in our past. And then it's those people who experience that and have horrible memories of physical education that end up being the ones who say we shouldn't have it in schools, and end up cutting it, or not supporting it, when it can actually be one of the best things that we can do. The Greeks had it right a couple thousand years ago when, healthy mind, healthy body, healthy spirit. We've known this as as a society, and then we've forgotten it. And I think right now we're on the upswing. I think people are realizing how important regular physical activity, healthy eating is for our own well-being. And I will keep on preaching that as long as I've got the opportunity to do so.
You know, I want you to stay on this because many of our listeners may have a sport or be active in what they do through health promotion. What's it like for a child of any age to be fearful and have anxiety over physical education?
Well, working with the kids in Milwaukee, and let me say kids are kids. That was my experience with elementary kids out in California. You know, kids are kids. At the elementary level, most of them love physical education. They're coming there, they're ready to run around and play and have fun. I've even had many physical education teachers say, well, now that we no longer use those red playground balls, you know, the ones that made all the wonderful noise when they bounced or when they hit someone, and we're now using foam balls for the most part. Teachers say, well, they can't get hurt. Well, the reality is that it's not always about the physical hurt, it's about the psychological hurt as well. And I have this same conversation with my physical education teachers. I have this conversation with every new hire. I have a one-on-one talk about what our purpose is in physical education, about creating a safe learning environment for all of our students. And I tell them that it's not a good practice, matter of fact, it's a negative practice to do, for example, dodgeball at this point. The argument is, well, we're not hurting the kids because they're using foam balls. You can't get hurt with a foam ball. Sorry, you can still get hurt. First off, I've seen bloody noses with the foam balls. The second thing is, I will still see dodgeball being performed in schools here in Milwaukee Public Schools. And I'll walk in and I'll have a very professional conversation with the teacher after the class is over. And we have a frank discussion about it. And I, 100% of the time over the last 13 and a half years of doing observations, if I've seen a dodgeball game, I've been able to identify one or two kids. I don't care if it's early elementary or if it's middle school, who's standing at the back, not participating, and ducking away when the ball comes near them because they don't want to get hit by the ball. And so while I can't say from my own experience how it feels to be afraid, I can watch and see what the reaction from those students are. And those students are the ones who are going to turn off and not do anything. As a matter of fact, I had a conversation last year with one teacher who, in my opinion, should know better because we've talked about this. We've had the conversation before. And I walked on in and we had this conversation about this young lady, probably a sixth grader, if I'm remembering correctly, who was in the back and was avoiding being hit and just looked completely unhappy. And he goes, oh, she never participates. And that led to another conversation. Well, if she's never participating, what are you doing to change that opportunity for her to participate? Because by choosing an activity like this that you know she's not going to like, you're going to make it even less likely that she'll participate in your class in the future. And then we're turning this girl, this young lady, off possibly to being physically active because there's nothing there that she's enjoying. And that's the thing that I don't want to have happen, where we lose a generation, because of choices that the adults are making, not because of the kids. Now, the other argument we hear all the time, by the way, is, oh, all the kids love it. That's a fallacy. All the kids don't love it. Well, we do a vote and everybody voted yes. Again, it's another fallacy because the votes are almost always open votes where everybody has to raise a hand. And who are the people in power? It's usually the athletes, the kids who are really good at sports. And the kids who don't have the power in the class are usually the ones who are not good in sports. And they're going to get egged on to vote, oh, yes, yeah, we're all going to vote yes so we can all play, even though you got kids who don't like it. Because again, I've seen it dozens and dozens of times in our district where we have this conversation around appropriate practices. And I have always been able to pick at least one, if not multiple students out of the class who do not like the activity. And it's not just about not liking the sport. I'm good about introducing a new activity to students because nobody's going to be good with it the first time they do it. but choosing activity that actually is detrimental. The other aspect, I'm just going to have to say it here, is for people who are saying it still toughens kids up. Dodgeball itself can be considered or a bullying activity, even when students are not intentionally trying to bully. So then it's an activity that can promote bullying. So Brett Fuller has been a bullied kid in the past. He's playing dodgeball because his physical education teacher says everybody has to play. David is an athlete on the other side. David gets with his buddy Chris, and they said, hey, what's a good strategy in dodgeball? It's ganging up on one person and throwing the ball at that person at the same time. So you do that. Half the time or more, they're going to pick on the poorer athletes first. Get them out, then you can get more people to target the athletes. It's a very good strategy. It's smart play. David and Chris are not trying to bully. That's not their intention. By the way, that is actually part of the definition of bullying. Okay? So David and Chris are not being bullies. Brett Fuller has been bullied in the past. What are two other components of being bullied? Person with power is exercising that power in a negative way. Okay? So we said it earlier. Who's usually a person of power in a physical education class? An athlete. Okay? Brett Fuller's not that athlete. Second one, repeated offenses. Okay? Brett Fuller has been bullied in the past. He's experienced bullying. And now I have two athletes ganging up on me, and a dodgeball game doesn't happen just once in a class. You go for a period of time, game ends, you start another game. You might have 2, 3, or 4, depending on what the lesson plan for that teacher is. And if that teacher says we're just doing a day of dodgeball, that's 45 minutes of repeated attacks against someone who's been bullied. That student's going to feel like they're being bullied, even though that's not the intent. And intent is really important when we're talking about true bullying. But again, it's an experience that is just going to really be a negative psychological experience for that student, even if they're getting hit by foam balls.
You know, you bring up some really good points that can have a greater application to our community. Too many students who might be perceived as different either by themselves or by outside forces can experience that bullying, whether it be in verbal taunts, through social media, through physical intimidation and violence. And we hear about some of those in the popular media, but you know, rarely do we hear about this in physical education. But you bring out a good point about the connectivity and the intersection of bullying. And it just doesn't stop in the community or in the classroom. It's potentially pervasive, as well as how people of power, which is teachers, can also support that culture of bullying, marginalization of people. What's the reaction that you get from teachers when you have this conversation with them, Brett? How do they respond?
Pleasantly, I'm happy to say that almost every new hire that I have done in the last 5 years, I've gone through and had these conversations. They get it. They say, "Yep," and that's and those new hires to Milwaukee Public Schools who have not been that were already veteran teachers. Almost to a person said, "Oh, I haven't done that in my class in years." So I'm really hoping we're seeing a significant change in my profession. The reality is, though, like I said, if there's a group online called PE Central, you want to start an argument, it's going to be about dodgeball. So, but overall, I think it's very positive. But again, dodgeball is just one example of it. As the intro had mentioned, I was blessed to have worked with two school psychologists, and they helped me, and we wrote an article that was ended up being the front page article in a journal, one of the national journals, and it was on bullying and physical education. And one of the things that we did is we did a survey of several schools of students to find out where they thought bullying was most prevalent in the schools. Number one place is the locker room. Locker rooms are a little bit less supervised. Not saying they're unsupervised, but you know, teachers don't hang out in the locker room because obviously kids are changing. Teachers are monitoring the locker room, listening for things. and trying to address issues. But bullying that's one of the number one places. Physical education class and recess are the second and third. So it's one of those things that it still happens, and that's not even even in a dodgeball class. Good friend of ours, Bruce Dreyer, he actually gave me a story that we used in the article as one of the introductory stories. He told me a story about a class he was doing a game called team handball. Team handball is a game like soccer, but it's played with a small hard ball that's about half the size of a basketball. It's got a goal and a goalie. And he at one point told one of his students, hey, by the way, it's your turn, young lady, because the students had self-selected. It was primarily boys playing a game and girls playing another game. At the time, the girls who wanted to play against the boys could, and it was self-selected. But he was trying to rotate and get everybody a chance to play every position. And he told this young lady, and this is a tough story. He told this young lady she needed the goalie for the last half of the class. And she was reluctant, but she did there because she's a good student. And at the end of the class, he complimented her on how good a job she did because she blocked almost all the shots. He didn't find out till later that she didn't block the shots. The girls in the other class and the other team were targeting her and purposely hitting her. And so it's one of those things is we have to be so aware of what's going on in our class. And again, I don't think he did anything wrong. He just didn't know. And he thought he was, and I would have been in the same boat. And so we talked about it afterwards. You know what? We no longer made students to be goalie if they didn't want to be goalie anymore. We made changes to our practice so that would be less likely to happen. You know, the other thing I have to point out though is that one of the things that we're really focusing on right now and have been for the last several years, but during this COVID-19 crisis, I think it's an opportunity, is that we are really within our physical education standards at the national and state level. We are the health education standards, physical education standards. We are the only content standards, with the exception of the high school psychology standards, that have social emotional learning built into our standards. We have a whole standard around respect and sportsmanship in physical education. We have an entire standard around valuing physical activity, and it includes components around the social aspects of physical activity. So we have standards around social emotional learning. Now, this story that I just told about the young lady, those standards were around possibly because that story is 15, 20 years old. And we haven't had the standards for, the first set of standards came out in 2007. So, that's 20 years ago. So it's one of those things that we've gotten better as a profession. And the other thing that we're really trying to make a shift on is trying to focus more on those standards as we're teaching them, because they're there and they're so vital to our kids' health and well-being that we can hopefully avoid some of what was happening 15, 20 years ago or more in our classes. So again, it's one of those things, it's so important that we are aware of what we're doing as health and physical education instructors. Now we're setting up our classes. But we also have to really focus on the physical. We're still teaching in some of our classes the team sports because that's how some people find and are able to stay physically happy, because that's the stuff they love. But we also need to be teaching other things as well.
A good point here about this idea of social and emotional well-being. And your story struck me at a number of levels. But we know from the literature around adverse childhood experiences that persistent trauma, like bullying, is something that stays with a person forever. And I can see how if repeatedly a child is subjected to this, that they suddenly could develop post-traumatic stress disorder around physical activity, or just frankly develop all sorts of issues related to it. So you bring up a really good point here. I want to ask you, Brett, you've been in schools for 30 years now. I know that its physical education has changed, and you said children are children. But what's it like for a child in 2020 in our school district? Talk about the children.
Oh, that's hard. Because I just, I see the joy, I see the laughter, the fun they have when they go into an elementary physical education class. I see that in many of our high school classes. They just want to have fun, and blow off some steam. I think that hasn't changed personally. The reality of the challenges our kids have been going through is hard, and so that's why I really encourage and tell our teachers they've got to get to know their kids to be able to build relationships with them. And again, I want to be 100% clear here, because I say this to the teachers. I'm not saying you're becoming friends with the students. You've got to get to know them. You've got to get to know them so they can start learning to trust you. And trust goes two ways. It's incredibly sad about the stories we hear from our students about the family lives that they're having to deal with, the challenges that I never had to deal with in growing up. I'm not saying there weren't people in my community that had challenges, but it is tough. I guess, but for me, mostly it's that I still walk in and I'm seeing hope. Again, especially if I've got a really good teacher, and we have a lot of really good physical education and health teachers in this district, and they build up resiliency skills for our students. One of the things that we've been doing a lot of lately is mindfulness for the last 3 or 4 years. And many of our teachers now have got the practice where they'll do a mindfulness activity at the end of their physical education class. And I've heard classroom teachers say, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you get them into this big open space and they are going wild. What the teacher thinks is wild, when all we're seeing is kids playing and still learning, but still playing. And yet then we're able to calm them down so they're focused for the classes afterwards, But it's tough. You look at our youth risk behavior survey data, it's upsetting when you've got LGBT youth in some of our schools identified as high as 18 or 20%. And 30% of those students are carrying weapons to schools because they do so for protection. You have the students who will talk about bullying experiences in our youth risk behavior survey. Again, it's mostly high school. We do have some middle school data that talk about, if you dig down into the data, you can see the high percentage of them who say they're bullied because of their weight. And that happens to be the case when 35% of our youth on the YRBS at the high school level are identifying as overweight or obese. So there's so many challenges for our kids that it's tough. I feel for them. I'm empathetic. I want to find ways to help them, support them to be able to overcome the challenges that they're facing, which again, honestly, I never had to face, and yet they're doing it with more grace than I ever could, I think.
I talked with a mutual friend of ours who's an educator, and she said some of the children in a school that she works with take all three meals at the school.
Yep.
What's the impact? You mentioned challenges, you mentioned some of the issues. How does those challenges like that you spoke of and this teacher speaks of, how does that impact the students? Not only their physical well-being, but their educational well-being and the social emotional connections that we make with students.
So I'm fortunate enough, our district has back in 2007 adopted, at the time it was called the Coordinated School Health Model. It's now called Whole School, Whole Community, Whole Child Model. It's a joint project between the Centers for Disease Control and ASCD, a national association around research and education. And this wellness policy, every school is supposed to have one in MPS where they have a school health team. And their job is to actually look at data and to help come up with strategies to reduce barriers to learning. So those barriers include nutrition, poor nutrition, physical activity, lack thereof, mental health, family support. So there's a whole bunch of community support. There's a whole bunch of areas that we're looking at. And one of the things that we do when I talk with staff members, well, why are we doing this? We've already got so many committees. What's this make a difference of? And I said, have you ever had a student in your class who had a toothache? Absolutely. Okay, how will they learn that day? They don't. They can't focus on that. Ever a student in your class that couldn't keep awake because they were up all night taking care of a sibling? How well are they learning? Ever have a student who is so hungry that they couldn't concentrate on what they're doing? It's the reality for too many of our students. And so it really does impact all aspects. They cannot learn if these basic human elements are not taken care of first. And
So
that's just the reality.
I want to flip it, because we're known to, it's easy for us to be mired in the, oh, here's what this means to the student. Yep. And you have spoken of this, of some work of somebody that you look up to out of Chicago. Could you speak into what does proper physical education and nutrition mean to educational attainment?
Well, I'm actually going to speak that from my friend Chicago. Eileen Hare is doing phenomenal work there. We just had a big mini conference with our national association at one of her schools. I will speak there about this school, but I got to go to a different one after this one. This school, K through 8 building in an old K through 12 and an old high school. And I'm simply astounded what they're doing around physical activity, healthy eating in this school. They start swimming lessons for all students in physical education. Something's a lifetime skill. Talk about it. It's not. They start doing that in first grade. They have daily snacks for students. It's all healthy snacks. Not saying that they don't have the occasional sweet for a party or something like that, but they make a real big point of doing healthy snacks for the kids. And this school is one of the schools that is really being seen as successful within Chicago Public Schools. I want to talk specifically though, again, fantastic. They use the whole school, whole community, whole child model. They're doing everything right. They're seeing their academic scores going up. They're seeing increased community engagement. They're seeing increased parental engagement. It just is a wonderful chance, the opportunity to go there and see them. But a friend of mine retired from Miami-Dade a couple of years ago, Dr. Jane Greenberg. And she is what I've always called a rock star of curriculum specialists or curriculum administrators for health and PE. And she did some incredible work around this similar model in Chicago Public Schools, in Miami-Dade schools. And in specifically one project that she did that just was astounding. In Florida, you only need 2 semesters of physical education to graduate high school. So the first semester of physical education in her school district was primarily what most of us think of as a high school PE class. It's got traditional sports, things like that. But then she completely threw that out for the second semester, and she got grant funding to help do this. And it became a fitness for lifestyle class. They did not teach one sport in that class for that semester. It was all of the physical activities that adults do to stay physically active for a lifetime. They did Pilates, yoga, did aquatic stuff where they went out and did kayaking out in the bay in Miami. They did all these things that were more engaging for our high school students. And the crazy thing is, it became so popular that they had waiting lists for students to get into the class to take it a second and third time, because that's what they wanted. They didn't want the traditional physical education class. And we've tried replicating that here in Milwaukee. We've had some success at some of our high schools, but not as much as I had seen in Miami. And I think that was more along the lines is it's still a commitment by the teachers to change, because human beings don't like change. So we've got some work to do. And it's different. It's a completely different style of class, but a couple of our high schools are really seeing, I think, some much more engagement from that class than from a class that's traditional team sports. But
Again, I
again,
want you to
that's
drill
just one
down a little
aspect
bit
of the
more.
dual school model.
And I want you to talk about John Rady's work. And that was the school I was originally thinking of in Chicago, but how that has grown in national prominence. Can you take that together? Because I think that really is this idea of fitness for life, connections to health, but I really want you to bring it back to the idea of educational attainment and what physical education and activity means to that.
So Dr. John Rady is a professor, a clinical psychologist out of Harvard. And he wrote a book many years ago called Spark, the new science of physical activity in the brain. And a friend of mine came back from the national convention, which I couldn't attend that year, and gave me the book. And now I have a stack of them in my office. And whenever I hear of a principal who's considering cutting back on their physical education program, or we get a new chief academic officer, new director of curriculum instruction, new superintendent, they get a copy of the book. And I only tell them, read the first chapter. That's all you need to read. The rest of the book is great, but the first chapter sets the tone about why we should be doing physical activity. And it actually was not Chicago, it is an Illinois school district that actually used to do the program based on Rady's work. But really, it demonstrates the importance of physical activity on health outcomes and academic outcomes. There's some wonderful stories in the book, and his book has got research in there that identifies research that supports the thesis that the brain relies on physical activity. So when I was president of Wisconsin Health and Physical Education, my theme for that year is we're built to move. And it really came from this idea around the brain health that we have from Rady's book. We are not built to sit, we're built to move. He quotes in his book that when we evolved, we were hunter-gatherers. We moved 8 to 12 miles a day. And we're built to move that actually helps the elasticity of our brain. When I was growing up and when I was in college, people will probably remember, hey, you go out and you have a few beers, you're killing brain cells. And we were told back then, brain cells don't grow back. And it's now proven that that's incorrect. You know what actually grows new brain cells? Physical activity. Physical activity grows new brain cells. And so Paul Zintarski was a physical education teacher who's quoted in the book from Illinois. And he ended up saying, and it's one of my favorite quotes, is that in our physical education classes, we grow the new brain cells. It's up to the other classroom teachers to fill them. Mm. And one of the researches they did in his school district is they took students who were struggling with math, and they had a control group, and that the control group had math first hour. The group that was the test group had math first hour as well, but they did a 0-hour physical education class that focused on cardiovascular fitness. And it was statistically significant improvements in the students who were in the test group over the students who just had first hour math, who had already been struggling students. And the only difference that researchers came up with was the physical activity. And those students actually caught up on being behind in grade level test scores. One of the other things is that particular school district, which is escaping my mind right now, and I'll remember it as soon as we're done, they, compared to other nations on some national test scores, they were rated up near the top. And again, it's an affluent community in Illinois, but there are other affluent communities. And again, the only thing that they could see that was different when they were taking out other factors was the physical activity programs that were done through their physical education classes starting in middle school.
So what do you think is happening as a scientific, in a scientific perspective, as a physical education scientist? What do you think is going on there?
I will talk about where I think we're going in general. Physical education teachers for decades have said we're important. People back when they created schools thought physical education must be important. But then in the 70s and 80s, when test scores started going down, and 90s, physical education, recess, other things started getting cut. What I'm hopeful for at this point is the fact is that the science is catching up with what we've always known, that physical activity, regular physical activity, actually is important to the health of of who we are as human beings. And that health includes our mental, spiritual health, and also our academic and cognitive health. That regular physical activity is going to boost performance long after we're out of schools. And I think that we're now getting the evidence to support this, and it's helping us. But the problem is people still think the more seat time you have on a subject area is going to improve test scores, when actually the evidence isn't there. There's some really good evidence, especially when it comes to math, that's saying that more seat time does not necessarily improve it. It's actually helping them support in other areas, including physical activity.
You know, how do you convince a building administrator and or a parent of the importance of physical education? What would you say to them?
Well, it's pretty much, that's what I'll share. There's some good graphics out there that show the benefits. So there's one that we've shown for about 5 years about a group of students who had sat, because a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? Who sat quietly 20 minutes before a test, and it actually showed the brain activity while the students were taking the test. And the brain had a lot of blues, a lot of cold colors. And then what was happening during test taking when students did a 20-minute walk prior to starting the test, and a lot of bright colors. Most of the brain is lit up in oranges and reds and yellows. And it's showing how much more active the brain is just by doing a little bit of physical activity. And that's one of the ways I've been able to, I think, get our principals on our side and get parents on our side to some degree.
You know, when you say that, I know that when I sit too long, I get sluggish and I start to run down, and it's only anecdotal, but man, I get the wiggles and I get the, oh man, I got to stand up and I got to move.
Yep.
Kids are the same way, right?
Yep. Built to move. We're not built to sit. Yep. 100% agree with you on that. Matter of fact, it's one of the things I'm unfortunately, and during this time of COVID, it's harder to do, but unfortunately, as a central office administrator, we have a lot of meetings. When I have the opportunity, I make certain I sit at the periphery. I'm not saying I'm sit at the back, because most people know that I'll stand up now about 25, 30 minutes into a meeting for 10, 15 minutes, just to help keep myself focused on the work that I'm doing.
So for those who are at home and listening, if Brett stands up, and because we've been at this for a little bit now, if he stands up, don't be offended because he's just practicing what he talks about here. Brett, can you speak into, because I know you that you are the current president of Shape America. Can you tell us what Shape America is, what your role is in the organization, and what you're seeing on the national stage around physical education in this space?
So Shape America is the Society of Health and Physical Educators. It is the National Professional Association for both health and physical education teachers. Shape America has created the national standards for physical education. They're called the grade level outcomes for K through 12 physical education. We are part of a coalition that had helped develop the national health education standards. Shape America provides professional learning opportunities for health and physical education teachers. And we also are advocates for health and physical education at the local, state, and national level. What I mean by the local, we help provide resources to teachers and documents to show the benefits of physical education, because a lot of times teachers don't have the latest research that they can then print off and take to administrators, school board members, and the like. The same thing happens at the state level. There's a state association in every state of the country that is their own entity. We help and we partner with them and provide them the resources that they can use at the state level. And then we actually have people who lobby at the national level and go and talk with the people at the Senate and the House of Representatives. And we've gotten very well known at those levels. We're a known force at the national level for advocating for health and well-being of all students. So one of my favorite events that we do is a National Speak Out Day, where we go and pound the pavement in Washington, D.C. and go up to Capitol Hill. And this has been going on for over 10 years. And everybody knows when the physical education teachers are in town, because we might be in suit and ties, but we're all wearing neon colored tennis shoes. It's a fun photo opportunity. And we're getting in and talking with people who they know us know many of us by first name now. And they listen to us, even those people who normally wouldn't support us. And they say, okay, well, maybe there's something we can do. You may not get everything you like, but we understand, and we understand what's going on. So we're making progress. I'm very excited about that at the national level. It was through advocacy, through a coalition that Shape America was a huge part of, that helped bring back Title IV safe, that used to be Safe and Drug-Free Schools. It's now used to help support the health and well-being of students in all content areas. And so there are portions of there that are supposed to be used for health and physical education specifically. And that was through significant work by Shape America staff and the lobbying efforts that they do. When it comes to physical education, we are again leading the way by listening to our members and to what's happening in our schools. I call myself a servant leader. I am the president is an elected position, holds office for 1 year. 1 year, I should say 3 years. 1 year is what's called the president-elect, learning what's going on. 1 year is president, and 1 year is past president. So I've been fortunate enough to be I was on the board of directors for 3 years before I ended up being and taking this role. It's a pleasure and an honor to serve this great association, and I'm there to learn and take what I've heard from people all over the country, and try to make certain that we're trying to support them and develop the resources that they need, especially at times like this. You know, and I am so proud of the work that our physical education teachers have done during this crisis with the epidemic around COVID-19. My theme as president for this year is we're stronger together. And this came around naturally. When COVID hit, we were actually in DC talking about what's going to happen. Is it going to get bad? And then within a week, everything was shutting down. That was for the Speak Out Day. And what was really interesting is watching what happened in our association and our members across the country, people who are not members, people who are members. Teachers a lot of times are pretty protective of the work that they've created. They don't always want to share their resources because that's my lesson, and I want to get credit for it, and I want to. But we've always had some who've shared and gave of themselves, and I found those were the people who are usually part of our associations. But I'm so proud of the health and physical education teachers in this country. Everybody stepped up when people all of a sudden had classes canceled and they had to end up teaching online physical education, and we've always opposed that in the past, and now it became our reality. People were sharing resources. Hey, this worked, this didn't work. Try this out. Hey, I saw this great video. It was so amazing seeing our community come together and support each other. And we've continued to do that. And Shape America had to do a major shift, changing from some of the things they were doing to now this type of support. And we have great partners at the national level. The Centers for Disease Control, one of our best partners, they came to us and now they're helping us support. We've got a new position whose job for the next year is to only support and create professional learning opportunities and resources for our teachers in this country. And all of this is going to be free to every physical education teacher in the country that they can use, because that's what we need to do at this time, to support each other. Because you support our teachers, you're supporting our kids. And it's always got to come back to the kids.
You were talking, and I really appreciate that aspect of connecting to our legislative leaders on down to the local. I want you to talk about this issue of this shift in physical education, emphasizing the importance in the schools. But I want you to take it to outside, because we're continuing to see a rise in chronic diseases like type 2 diabetes, obesity, issues related to lifestyle, hypertension. As you continue to see this shift in physical education, what role might that play in decreasing chronic disease?
Well, it goes back to the whole purpose of why I'm a physical educator and what I've been trying to instill in students, and hopefully the teachers I now have the opportunity of serving, is this idea that we have three things that we should be doing as physical education teachers. Number one, we need to help students develop skills to be physically active for a lifetime. So this is what we've always excelled at. We've always excelled at teaching kids how to throw, catch, run, gallop, hop, do sports. We've always excelled at that, and that's our bread and butter. The challenge is the sports part of that. We have had a tendency to really focus on sports when sports are not necessarily the things that adults do to stay physically healthy for a lifetime. Only 26% of adults after high school will ever join a sports team. Okay, 26%. Oops, sorry, wrong stat. Only 26-year-olds, sorry, 54% of people who are 26 years old and over will join a sports team at that point. And so 54% is pretty darn good. That's a real good number, okay? But we have 45% of our population who don't. So we've got to do something more than just teach the traditional sports. That's why we've got to do other things. We have to expose our students to lifelong activities, doing biking as part of a physical education class, doing swimming, doing other things that, yoga, Pilates, the things that adults do to stay physically fit. 5% of adults use sport to stay physically fit. Only 5%. Okay, that's also pretty tough. So it's like, that's why we got to find other things. I love to play volleyball. I'll play when I can, but it's not what I do on a daily basis to be physically active. So we got to teach people that physical activity is more than just sports. Go for a walk. Go do some gardening. That's low intensity physical activity, but it's more than what we've been doing. And so that's part. So that's teaching skills. If you don't teach a skill, the student is not go to a family reunion after high school, and someone's got a volleyball net. Hopefully they learn some basic skills so they feel comfortable playing volleyball with the family. That's a great thing. Those are what I'm talking about. But if they never learned the skills to bump set in volleyball, and you've got a couple players on their side who are really good, you might end up having some family members say, I'm not going to play because I don't want to, I feel foolish in front of them. So that's our number one. Teach them some skills. Basic recreational level, we're not teaching them to be athletes. Number two is we teach the skills. We got to give them the knowledge. And that's the physical fitness knowledge. That's why do I need to be physically active? Where do I go and find physical activity once I'm out of high school that I can do that will be safe for me? So it's that knowledge. What are some basic fitness skills I need to know so I don't hurt myself? Those are things we have to do. And then it's the attitude. The attitude is hard to teach. So that's why we need to expose our students to as many different physical activity opportunities throughout their school career. This usually starts more in middle school and high school, especially if we're doing our jobs, we're doing it at the high school level. We're not repeating a lot of things they learned at the lower levels. And that's a big shift in physical education because a lot of high school programs are still very sports-based. And so that's why we need to do some things. I'm really excited about a program we started a few years ago based on one of my teachers who's doing it on his own for our summer school. We did a physical education in the community program that was highly praised by the students. They loved it. Some of the best engagement we've had in a PE program. 4-week program, they did PE 4 hours a day for 4 weeks, okay? But they did lifetime activities throughout that week. So there was a lot of Pilates, a lot of those types of things. But they learned some specific skills too. And the end of the 4 week, the last day was a field trip to some physical activity option in our community. So 1 week they went and did Frisbee golf because we have a lot of wonderful Frisbee golf programs, courses here in Milwaukee that are free. Another time they went to swimming. Another activity, they went down to Bradford Beach. They were able to play sandlot volleyball. They also were able to use the fitness trail down there. So there was a lot of different things that we did throughout that program. And that's the type of things I think we need to do more of at our high school level, especially, because that's going to get kids excited and say, oh, well, this isn't so bad. There's something called perceived exertion. I loved watching this in a middle school class. We did a Dance Revolution activity there. And they actually had great high quality pads for two for kids who are active. And then there's some practice pads and kids would rotate on and try to keep it going. And we did a little test. They were all wearing heart rate monitors. And we asked the students what they thought, how they're not, give a percentage of how hard you were working. And many of the students were putting it at around 50 or 60% when they got done with their Dance Revolution activity. The heart rate monitor showed they were between 80 and 90% of their target heart rate. And it was because they were having fun and didn't realize how hard they were working. And so that's part of the whole fun aspect that we need to make certain we bring back in our physical education programs, which we sometimes lose a little bit, I think, at the high school level, because so many students are not necessarily interested in team sports. So we got to find the fun.
You keep coming back to this notion of fun. You started this and then you went to the skills, knowledge, attitudes, and fun. This is about connecting to resources. Can you tell our audience, who are many of them who are going to be local, what support does physical education teachers in the local community need? How can people support physical education in our schools?
Number one is make certain you talk and you're aware of what's going around physical education in your school districts. And if there seems to be any talk about cutting physical education in any way, we need to be vocal as a community. So for example, right now, there are stories happening throughout the country because of COVID-19. The physical education teachers will no longer be teaching physical education this coming school year. I'm proud to say that this has not been something that's happening in Milwaukee Public Schools. But in other communities in Southeast Wisconsin, what's happening is to reduce class size, the PE teachers are now saying, you're going to teach social studies and science and math this year. So they can reduce class sizes. So our kids aren't getting physical education, which is a great release for social emotional learning, as we said, during an incredibly stressful time. So we have to be advocates in our communities with our school boards and our administration. So that's number one. So that's probably the biggest thing you can do, is be aware of what's happening in your district and your local schools, and then talk. Go out there and say, this isn't right. We need to support our students. They need quality health and physical education. The second thing, part of that, is make certain you do know what's going on. There's a document on Shape America called The Essentials of Physical Education, Essential Components of Physical Education. Go to shapeamerica.org and type in essentials. You can get this document. That tells you what should happen in physical education classes nowadays. And it's a 2 or 3 page document. So it's a great resource for you to go after, pull up, and then ask, what's going on in the PE class? Find out. And if you've got kids or relatives who are in these PE classes and say, well, that's not right, go to the school and say, hey, here's a document. This is not good quality PE right now. Why is this? And what can we do to support that? Okay. Third thing then is help the teachers out by letting them know if you hear of resources for them. A lot of times our physical education teachers are swamped. Many of them are teaching 8 or 9 classes a day. Many of them might be in multiple schools. So think about that. If you're in a district where you got a physical education teacher who's at 2 schools, those 2 schools might have 300, 400, 500 kids each. I've got some schools that got 600 or 800 kids. So you could have over 1,000 students that one physical education teacher is seeing. So they don't have the opportunity to let people know what's going on in the local community necessarily to go out and do the research. So if you hear of a walk going on that supports physical education, or an opportunity for kids and families to be physically active together, hey, share it with the school, share it with the physical education teacher, because our physical education teachers should be making connections or helping their students make connections in the community.
I love that.
Those are 3 areas I would recommend.
And you can also ask the teachers, hey, you're not playing dodgeball, right?
That's right. Yep. The other thing I would say also is just ask your teachers, are you members of your professional association? Professional association is a great way of getting additional support for the teachers, just by the nature of resources, opportunities for professional learning.
I'll say to all our listeners, we're going to on our website through Days of Learning, where this podcast is available on YouTube, we will link to some of these resources like the Essentials of Physical Education that Brett mentioned, as well as this idea of some of the brain research and some of those resources, because I love that idea of community members connecting to physical education and physical education connecting to the community. Brett, you are a hopeful individual, so I've got to ask you this question. What gives you hope?
Oh, one of the things we didn't talk about is my hat is at leading health education. And when I first got in this role, the community had been addressing teen pregnancy for decades. And we were still in the top 10 for teen pregnancy in the country for over a dozen years. Just saw a report yesterday that there's been new research out. We're now 47 for teen pregnancy out of the 50 largest cities in the country.
That's a good thing, right?
That's a great thing. We reduced our teen pregnancy rates by 65% since 2008. And a lot of it is because of some of the work we did in MPS, but it's mostly because of a community effort to support our kids, to have a conversation, and to make real change in their lives. And that's what I'm hopeful and hoping that we can make some changes. The obesity and overweight and obesity rates have gone up significantly in the last 25 to 30 years, going on probably even 40 years at this point. And I'm hopeful that the research is coming out, that people are going to finally say enough is enough, like we did around teen pregnancy in this community. And we're going to do something to change the lives of our kids so that they can go out and play in their neighborhoods and feel safe in their neighborhoods, so that they have our opportunities to be physically active on a daily basis that is enjoyable for them and for their families. And I hope that that this research that continues to come out and support the benefits of regular physical activity for our kids will make that difference, and that we can actually see a change and start turning things around. We made that change. We changed our teen pregnancy rate within 5 years. We had reduced it by over 50%, and within 7 we were at 65%. And that's where we've been at for a while. We have a lot of work still to do in that area, but we can make this change, and I think it can happen. But it's going to have to be a community effort. People are going to have to step up and say, "Is enough is enough."
You know, I think that's a great place for us to end this, because you began this interview with talking about coming from a small town and people knowing one another. And we're also thinking about the idea of getting to know your local physical education and health teacher and to be a support for that. You know, I think if we applied this not only to teen pregnancies, but if we could apply it to chronic disease management like type 2 diabetes and hypertension and obesity, and the things that are frankly costing us life, if you will, that our community would not only be healthier, but perhaps they would be happier as well. You know, Brett Fuller, you are a joy to me personally and to all the people that know you. I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today. And I got one final question. Will you come on again sometime?
Absolutely. It's been fun. And it's been an honor. Again, like I said, I've always seen myself as a servant leader. I'm here to serve. And if anybody can take anything that I talked about today and make the lives better for the kids in their community, that's all what it's about. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Brett, thank you again for coming on the show. And we look forward to you coming back in the future. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye.
Wow, that was quite an interview. I so enjoyed talking with Brett Fuller. You know, he started off by talking about growing up in a small town and what that was like and how everybody knew their neighbors, and that has continued throughout his career. Brett spoke of his father and how his father didn't necessarily like his work, and you can tell from Brett today that he really loved his work. I think I was struck the most by this idea of bullying in the classroom or bullying in the community, especially for students who might not be that athletically inclined. Imagine a world where we celebrate the people for who they are and for how gifted they are, regardless of how they perceive themselves. And I think everybody can be physical and everybody could be gaining benefits from physical activity. We want to support that. He spoke of fun and seeing the joy that comes from students who are having fun in the classroom, regardless of their home environment. And we know in our local community that some of those environments are challenging. I think that I want to end with some of the things that he mentioned. There are really 4 things here. One, that physical education develops those skills for a lifetime. 2, that they equip their children with knowledge for being physical in the present and the future. And 3rd, and maybe most important, is that physical education tries to strive for giving students the right attitude that they can take with for a lifetime. This notion of physical education as something extra, we've heard today the importance of physical education, not as an extra, but as an essential subject within our schools, and how schools need that local support. So Days of Learning is about making those connections to community and making connections from resources to the community. So if you're so inclined, reach out to physical education teachers in your local area to find out what they're doing. And yeah, you should ask them if they're playing dodgeball. On behalf of our sponsors, we want to thank you for coming on to the show today, for listening, for giving of your time. And we want to leave you with that notion of, like Brett said, together we can. We are built to move. And when we move, we potentially increase our satisfaction with life, and we decrease our likelihood of chronic illness. We wish you continued health, wellness, and blessings. Thank you for joining us again. Goodbye.